That's the other reason why loss of the same person lands differently for all of us. Because when you lose the person, it's like you lose the person, you lose the relationship with the person, and then you also lose their particular reflection of you. Because, the way that my dad sees me and our relationship was different from the way that my mom sees me and our relationship. And, like, it's all different by default. Not that one is good or better than the other, but just different. And so when you lose someone that you're, really close to like that, you do also lose their reflection of you, how he specifically saw you. And that's hard.
Welcome to Normalize the Conversation by Inspiring My Generation. I'm your host, Francesca. Today, I'm joined by Marisa Renée Lee, award-winning author of Grief is Love and Waiting for Dawn, grief advocate and social impact leader whose work has been featured on Good Morning America, NPR, Vogue, and The Atlantic. In today's conversation, we're talking about grief, uncertainty, and what it really looks like to navigate life when everything feels changed. Marisa shares a powerful reframe on grief, not just as a loss of a person, but also the loss of how that person reflected you and your identity. We also explore what it means to live with uncertainty, how to stop comparing your healing journey to others, and why hope is not a feeling, but something we practice even in the hardest seasons. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by loss, stuck in transition, or unsure how to move forward when life doesn't look the way you expected, this episode is for you.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited for our conversation, but before we begin, I want to check in. How are you really?
I am tired and a little bit overwhelmed. I have long COVID and I'm actually on a new medication just as of a few months ago, a GLP-1 drug. And it's been super, super helpful. But the day that I'm due for a shot, which is today, I always just feel more exhausted, run down, and I'm in a week with 2 book events. So it's just kind of a lot. I could definitely use a nap today, but I'm pretty sure it's not going to happen.
I hope you get that nap. Tonight, I'm going out with my friend for her birthday, and I'm so excited to celebrate my friend. Love her so much, and I will go and celebrate my friends anytime, whenever they want. And it's past my bedtime when we go. And I realized that I used to love going out and dancing and having all this fun. And I feel like I've lived so many lives since then that I feel like I'm almost grieving that old me. I miss that version.
I mean, it's perfectly normal. I am 43. There are lots of different versions of all of us in this life. And I think it is important to hold space for the grief of previous seasons. I also think it's really important to be present with each season of life because you don't know how long it's going to last. You don't know when you're going to go from, oh, I love going out, 3 or 4 nights a week with my friends to, no, I would actually rather stay at home and read a book and maybe focus on my garden or my dog or whatever. And so I view that grief as an important reminder to prioritize presence.
I like that a lot because I get so in my head of when did I change? Why did I change? And so hyper focused on past version of me. And then life feels so uncertain in the moment. So then I'm so caught up in what future me should look like and where I should be. It's always been so hard to stay present and actually enjoy where I'm at because I'm like, well, this is where I was before. This is where I think I should be. How do I handle not knowing where I am and what's going to come next?
Shoulds are not our friends. Once you can let go of that shoulding, everything becomes a lot easier.
When did you learn how to let go of the shoulding?
If I had to guess, because I feel like I've been in a place of, I'm not going to do that to myself for a long time. So it was probably around the season when I lost my mom, which now is almost 19 years ago. So my mom first got sick when I was 13. She got sick the second time when I was 22, and she died a couple weeks after I turned 25 and right after her 49th birthday. And so, there were a lot of shoulds around that time, like related to career, social life, dating, etc. And also lots of shoulds around how I believed I should approach, her death, the grief after she died, all of it. And I would say it was probably within the first 6 months to a year after she passed away that I realized that those shoulds just weren't serving me. I think we get really caught up in other people's stories and other people's trajectories, and that is part of what creates the shoulds, but we all have a different life path. And so I think getting rid of the shoulds takes a lot of anxiety and can even reduce uncertainty in a lot of situations.
That makes a lot of sense. So back in 2018, my grandparents, my whole world, my best friends, they got into a car accident. I lost my grandfather. Almost lost my grandmother, ended up sleeping in a hospital chair next to her for 10 nights, trying to be there while she learned to sit up again and walk again. And I got so consumed by I should be able to fix this for her and take care of her. I should be able to give up my sleep and doing things for me so that I can be fully present for her because she needs me. And I should be able to grieve my grandfather in this way. And all of these shoulds haven't gone away because I've just now internalized, well, you should be doing all of this better. Why aren't you compared to everyone else? How everyone else is grieving, how everyone else is handling it. The timeline of grief, everyone tells you what it's supposed to look like. This idea that happens in 5 stages in a row. How do you allow yourself to separate that and actually be present in the process so that it doesn't get into I should be in this stage, I should be doing better by now, kind of.
So 2 things. You said compared to everyone else. Someone said to me a handful of years ago, comparison is violence. And I just think that's such an important way to think about it because it really kind of is. It can lead to a lot of challenges for you individually if you get too caught up in comparing your life and your circumstances with someone else's. And so I think when we start to think of comparison as a violent act, it makes us less likely to engage with it. The other thing that I'll say is, in my first book, Grief is Love, I talk a lot about the 5 stages of grief because those stages, they weren't developed for you or me or someone else who's just lost someone they love. That research was actually based on research that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross did with people who were dying themselves. So those were the stages that that she was like witnessing in these individuals who were end of life, terminally ill. That's what she saw them going through. And that was a framework she came up with to help them and also, their family members better understand their experience. And so I think once we know that, this is a framework that has been completely misapplied, it makes it a lot easier to just completely get rid of it.
Okay, that takes away a lot of the pressure of this is how everyone else is doing it.
Even when loss occurs in the context of a family. I grew up with a 4-person family and, almost 20 years ago, one of the people died. The way that loss lands with me and what I need to get through it and to learn how to live with it is different from, how it lands with my dad who lost his wife and, this woman that he'd mostly been with since he was like 15 or 16 years old versus how it landed for my sister who, had a different relationship with my mom than the one that I had and has her own struggles with mental health that she has to live with day in and day out. And so I think it's important for people to recognize that, and we know this, but we forget about it in practice. Like, we're all different. And so why would we grieve or respond to the same tragedies in exactly the same way?
We are so different. And the way we express and process things is so different. Yeah. So to assume that we're all going to be going through in the exact same way,
it doesn't even make sense. Again, this is why comparison is violence. Like, think about the healing and the community and the love that gets lost in that kind of comparison.
Yeah.
Like, what purpose does it serve?
It really doesn't serve a good one at all.
Exactly.
I wish I had this conversation way earlier in life before I had to even really grieve a loss for the first time. I wish I knew how to feel like I had community and support in it instead of we all have to go through this alone. For me, at that moment in time, my grandfather, when I went to college, he would FaceTime me 3 times a day. So then it wasn't just grieving the loss of him. My identity was so wrapped up in this is who we are. We're best friends. My day revolves around talking with him. And no one talked to me about that version of grief either, because it wasn't just the loss of him. It was the loss of my entire structure of my life and what I thought it was going to look like, what I thought tomorrow was going to look like 5 days from now, a month from now, a year from now.
That's the other reason why loss of the same person lands differently for all of us. Because when you lose the person, it's like you lose the person, you lose the relationship with the person, and then you also lose their particular reflection of you. Because, the way that my dad sees me and our relationship was different from the way that my mom sees me and our relationship. And, it's all different by default. Not that one is good or better than the other, but just different. And so when you lose someone that you're, really close to like that, you do also lose their reflection of you, how he specifically saw you. And that's hard.
And it's so frustrating. I was not prepared for the loss. I wasn't prepared for what that meant for me after either. And it became so terrifying because then everything became uncertain. I didn't know what was going to happen at 7 a.m. because I wasn't going to get that FaceTime. When I was falling apart and I was really sad, I couldn't call him to sit there and talk to me. I felt so stuck then. What do I do now? He was the one who really made me feel like I mattered. Where do I get that feeling now? I didn't realize I could give it to myself at that time.
Yeah. It's hard. It's complex stuff. And, in our culture, we just don't give a lot of time or energy or space to conversations around grief and loss and healing and uncertainty and all of it. And so I think that also makes it hard. Because it doesn't feel like there's a lot of permission to have these kinds of conversations, which just makes the way you're feeling sometimes for some people, it feels wrong.
Yes, that was so hard for me. Pretend like I was okay so that everything felt okay for everyone.
Yeah. Especially as eldest daughter, Black woman, like first generation, everything. But that also doesn't serve anyone. Like the thing that really I believe is most helpful for people is telling the truth and being honest about how you're feeling opens up the door for other people to do the same around their feelings. And it just makes it easier for everybody else. Ultimately, it's messy and it's not necessarily fun, but I do think that is what makes it easier for people.
Absolutely. It's creating that space of vulnerability, and it's okay to be vulnerable makes such a difference. For people who've never had the space to be vulnerable, who always had to be strong, what advice would you give them? Feel like it was okay to answer honestly.
I think you have to give yourself permission to grieve on your terms and to tell the truth about how you're feeling. And you might not feel like you can be that honest with everybody, and that's okay, but you have to figure out who you can be that honest with and then go for it, because it's not going to make your life easier to hide how challenging your losses are. It's just going to make it harder to figure out how to sort through them, how to live with them, and what your specific healing needs are.
Yeah, who you can be honest with.
Because really, it might not be everybody, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm. I would always look for support in the people who were not going to give it to me to justify that feeling of, well, see, I'm so alone in it, because I was so used to that feeling. And when I learned to talk to people who had the emotional capacity to also sit there and listen and share what they were going through, it made such a difference.
And I think that's a really important thing for people to remember, especially young people. You know, the people who you can most rely upon, they may not be the people who you think you should be able to most rely upon. And again, that's like that word should, that doesn't really serve us. Like, you need to do an honest assessment of the people who are in your life in order to figure out who can support me the most and the best in this particular situation. Like in the loss of my mom, like my dad just didn't have the capacity because like he couldn't handle the loss of his wife. It was really hard for him. Totally understandable. But my godmother, who was my mother's best friend and, you know, had been in my life since I was a baby, she did have the capacity. And so that became more my primary support person over my father. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. You know, I know my dad loves and adores me, but you just have to be honest about where you are, and where other people are. Like, again, I keep talking about honesty and telling the truth, and it's not always easy, but I do think it is essential in situations like these.
Being honest about where other people are is that really important piece too, because I often would assume growing up that's like, well, they should, right? Because they're that parent, they should be able to guide me and teach me to cope with this. And this is who I should be able to talk to. When my parents were going through the divorce, my mom didn't have the emotional capacity because her whole life and identity was shifting. And I was looking for something from her that she didn't have. She was just holding on at that moment in time.
And, you know, totally reasonable for your mom and, you know, possibly your father as well to be at capacity given what they were going through. And it didn't mean that, you know, they loved you any less or, you know, didn't care about your feelings or anything like that. It's just, we all only have so much to give. And when you are the person that is like most directly experiencing the situation, whether it's an illness, a divorce, a death, etc., you may have to go like sort of one layer out in terms of your relationships to find the help that you need and deserve.
And it's a lot of giving people compassion and grace as well as yourself, what you need and what they need and what they can give, and finding, you said that outer layer, someone else who maybe can be there. It was so hard as a teenager to give my parents like compassion and grace because I had this idea of what it should be.
Kids are self-absorbed and selfish. Like that is like, that is just like statement of fact. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing bad about that. Like that's like kind of the way it is supposed to be biologically, at least to a certain extent. And I think because of that, it is hard to see our parents as humans as opposed to as mom and dad. But like, they have a life and, you know, needs and emotions and challenges and whatever, all outside of their kids. And I think that's hard to wrap your mind around when you're a kid. Like, I know I struggled with it. Yeah. I was like, what do you mean your world doesn't revolve around me? Are you kidding?
Right? I am the son.
Yeah, literally.
And now that I'm getting older, I'm starting to realize that you don't actually ever have it all figured out. Right? There is so much uncertainty. There are so many big emotions that are still going to happen. You're not suddenly going to become an adult and know everything and be able to handle everything. And for some reason, I had that like misconception of what adulthood and life was supposed to turn into suddenly.
I feel like all kids think like that. You know, my son is 4.5. And the other day, he said, when I grow up, I think I'm going to get a motorcycle. And my husband and I both at the exact same time said, absolutely not. And like, what do you think it means to like grow up? And he's like, you know, when I become a lot bigger, like you guys. I'm like, oh, okay. Okay, cool. So yeah, I think there are a lot of misconceptions that kids have about adulthood, and you don't realize how wrong you were until you're in the middle of it.
Yeah. It's not as fun as what you think it's going to be.
No, it's definitely not. It's definitely not. Uncertainty is one of the only guarantees in life. And whether it's the, you know, I say like little you uncertainty, should I pick this job or that job? You know, should I put myself out there and, you know, start dating again, etc. Or the big you uncertainties of things like, chronic illness, divorce, challenges with your children, like those types of things. It's coming for all of us at some point. And so I think it's important to figure out what you need to navigate uncertainty well. And in Waiting for Dawn, I focus heavily on the fact that uncertainty is a fact of life. The most important things that you can do are be honest about whatever the situation is, be willing to ask for help, and be committed to an ideology of hope, even when you're dealing with the hardest forms of uncertainty. Because if you can be, and this is according to research, not just according to Marisa, but if you can be committed to that ideology of hope, you will then, that way of thinking creates space for you to take the actions that actually build a better future for yourself. And so those are the things that I focus on, because there's no 100% right or wrong answer to most questions and problems in life. So instead, being very disciplined around key principles and ways of thinking about problem solving, I think that makes it easier for people to tackle uncertainty.
A journal prompt that I've been reflecting on a lot lately is, what does hope mean to me? Because I always say hold on to hope, hold on to hope. But I never thought about what that meant and how that serves me, right? When I go through a severe depressive episode and I think that it's going to be dark forever, right? How do I account for the fact that there can be joy in those moments too?
Yeah.
Both can coexist. How do I account for the fact that tomorrow the sun may rise, or it might rise a couple of days from now or a couple of weeks from now?
Yeah, we have to believe in a future better than our present circumstances, and then do the work to make it so. But know that sometimes it takes a really long time. It's not some instantaneous process. I have been sick for over 2 years. I am getting better. I am much better than I was 6 months ago, for sure. But there's still a lot of things that I just cannot do. And there are still a lot of things that even if I can do them, it's really hard, or it's going to, I don't want to say do some harm to my body, but I'm going to feel it physically. And that just has to be okay. So to your point, making sure that there's also room to create and acknowledge joy in the midst of those moments. Absolutely, 100%. We got a puppy a few weeks ago. She's a pain in the butt, but also very joyful. A year ago, when I was definitely maybe a little bit too weak to actually do what I'm about to tell you I did. I went with 5 or 6 friends to the Cowboy Carter concert at MetLife Stadium, because there was no way I was going to miss a Beyonce concert. I didn't care how sick I was. So making space for joy, it's not just, oh, this is going to make me happy. But when we create space for joy in times of grief and uncertainty, that break from the hard thing is part of what creates space for the brain to process that, challenge that you're dealing with, whether it's an illness like it is in my case, or the loss of someone you love. That joy really does help facilitate healing.
It really does. And I think there's been so much of this idea that you either have to be happy and full of joy or sad, that they can't coexist. Yeah. For you, having long COVID for 2 years, how have you been able to care for yourself, show up for yourself, and still find hope in the midst of all of it?
I just realized at a certain point, you have 2 options when things are really bad, and things were really, really bad. I had to come home early from a workshop I was running in Greece because I couldn't breathe. It turned out I had severe asthma in both of my lungs. I'd never had any breathing problems in the previous 41 years of my life. And my larynx was over 70% blocked. So not only was air not circulating properly in my lungs, it also wasn't getting up and out and into my brain and the rest of my body effectively. And so just walking around my house, I would get short of breath. I couldn't have a conversation for more than 5 minutes without feeling somebody was like sitting on top of my chest. I might have to rest for 5 hours before being strong enough to stand up and take a shower. Like washing my hair was an impossible mission because the idea of like having to have my arms like up suspended like that, like way too exhausting and like horrible chest pain and pressure. And you know, I said to myself, like, there are two options here. Like, it is hope or despair. Like, you have to pick one. Only you can pick one. And once you pick, like, you then have to do whatever it's going to take to stay on that path of hope, you know, whether it's therapy or antidepressants or help from friends, help from family, time away from work. Like, I was like, I know I have to be ruthless about this. Otherwise, I'm not going to get better. Because especially with something like long COVID, where, you know, half of this country thinks COVID itself is like made up. So long COVID obviously isn't a real thing. And then you add to that, it's a new illness. And so there are lots of wonderful, well-intentioned doctors who have no idea how to treat someone with long COVID and how to help you feel better. There are no like timelines around how long is long or, you know, what is the normal treatment protocol. You know, there was none of that. And so I knew I was going to have to be really ruthless and aggressive around healing. Otherwise, I was just going to be sick for the rest of my life.
I can't imagine that, like, feeling of unknown and what does this look like now?
Yeah.
Right? Because, like you said, it's new. The doctors don't yet know how to treat it, or you don't know the timeline, right? There's so much. I imagine it would be so much easier to fall into that despair with all the unknowns. And is it going to get better? Am I going to get better? And I love the idea of being ruthless in that hope and taking care of yourself and finding what works for you, right? Because a lot of times, I know for me, I often feel selfish if I'm doing something for me and really prioritizing what I need. And it took a long time to realize that that wasn't selfish. That was self-preservation. That was learning how to show up for myself and love myself and accept where I'm at and what I need, like I would for anyone else.
Absolutely. And the other thing is, you know, we think of it as selfish, but especially if you are in any sort of like caregiver role or having any sort of responsibility for someone else, if you don't do those things for yourself, you're not going to be able to do for them either. And so anytime, you know, moms in particular tell me that they're struggling with that, you know, I ask them to think about how much harder everything that they're trying to do for everyone else will be if, you know, they get sick, if they have, you know, some sort of mental breakdown because they're so stressed and overwhelmed. And when it's framed like that, I think that makes it easier for people to wrap their heads around, oh, this is the right thing to do.
I like that reframe. It's the right thing to do so that I can show up not just for myself, but for other people too, in the way that I want to and enjoy doing.
I think it's a hard thing for women and caregivers of any kind to wrap their heads around, but you will not be able to effectively do for someone else if you are not well. And when you think about it like that, I mean, it's obvious. You're like, oh, right. Yeah, that makes sense. And so I always encourage people to think about it like that if they can't just let themselves be number one priority.
Only we were taught this message at some point early. Through all your different seasons, what are some of the biggest and most impactful lessons you've learned along the way?
I mean, again, I think you really do have to put yourself first and let go of the idea of that being selfish. I think that you have to decide the direction that you want your life, your healing, etc., to go in. And then you don't just have to do the work to make it happen, but you also have to get comfortable asking for help. Like at different points, you may need different kinds of help, you know, whether it's therapy, antidepressants, support from a friend, accountability from a partner, like whatever it is, you have to ask for help because, you know, at the end of the day, we are all responsible for ourselves and no one else can heal from whatever your challenge is for you. But that doesn't mean you have to do it all alone. And so figuring out where other people can support you and show up for you is very, very important. And so I want to encourage people to let go of feelings of shame or inadequacy or anything else that is keeping you from asking for help, because I think it's important to think about how you feel when you are able to help someone else. Like, generally speaking, we feel good and we're proud and we're grateful to be able to do it. But when it's our turn, we have a much harder time asking for and accepting the help. And that's just silly. And then I would just add one more, and that's joy. Again, joy is healing, and it's also fun to have fun. Like, why wouldn't you want to have fun?
Yes, to that point of asking for help, I thought that would make me less strong, right? That strength was being able to handle everything for myself. And I love the reframe of how good it feels to help someone. And I never think that they're weak because they need help. I never think that that's wrong or bad. So for myself to think it took away from me was really kind of silly.
Yeah. I mean, there is no one who has achieved anything significant without some form of either free or paid help. Like, even if you want to take as an example, Jeff Bezos, one of the wealthiest human beings on the planet, right? He started Amazon with a $250,000 grant from his parents. Not grant, I'll say loan, since it was his mom and dad. Barack Obama. We wouldn't know Barack Obama if not for his senior advisor, who was, a super accomplished and successful Black woman in Chicago, Valerie Jarrett. She saw the potential. She got a bunch of other people on board, and he became what we know him as today. And so I just think it's important for people to recognize that this isn't something that just applies to us, like normal humans. Like, it applies to everybody. So don't feel shame for asking for help. Like, it just means you're human.
Yeah, I love those examples too, because we often see the success stories of it without knowing the backstory, right? So we often think that, well, look what they accomplished and they did this on their own. And we don't always see the support, because it takes a community. And that's not a bad thing. That's actually a really beautiful thing, to have that support and to have someone believe in you or to lean on. To wrap up, other than take a nap, because rest, it sounds like you could do that today.
Yes.
But what's something fun that you're going to do for yourself today?
I am probably just going to spend some time reading. I am a nerd. I love to read. I've probably have like 4 books going at once right now. And so I'll probably try and wrap up one of them.
I love that. Reading for me is the one thing that helps me really escape when my brain gets really loud. I love to read. Okay, I'm going to read today too.
There you go. I love it.
For those listening, how can they connect with you, learn more about you, your books, what you're up to?
So I am Marisa Renée Lee on all social platforms. My Substack is called Holding Both. Definitely subscribe. And Waiting for Dawn is available everywhere books are sold. But I am obviously going to encourage you to support your local independent bookstore.
Thank you so much for listening to Normalize the Conversation. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. This podcast is an initiative of Inspiring My Generation, focusing on normalizing the conversation, bringing education and awareness to the forefront, and amplifying global voices to spark change and hope. Inspiring My Generation is a 501c3 nonprofit organization on a mission towards suicide prevention through awareness, conversation, education, and support. Connect with us on Instagram at Inspiring My Generation and visit our website, inspiringmygeneration.org, to learn more about our work and how you can make a difference.